Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools and let's get started. So let's say you've created an illustration or some lettering in Procreate that would be perfect for a greetings card, but you're not exactly sure how to make that greeting cards come to life. Well, you might be tempted to go create a new canvas and set the size as the regular size of a sheet of paper. For example, here in North America, 8.5 inches by 11. You might also think, oh, I'm going to set my DPI to 300, which is usually what you want to use for printing. And you might also set your color profile to CMYK, which again is what you would use for printing. Now, the issue with that is when you create your canvas, you're going to see Procreate doesn't have any ruler or really anything to help you add some guides or some margin or bleed or something like that. So if you want to just create a super quick card and you're not worried about the standard size, you can for sure just do it like that. That being said, if you want to have a card that is going to be the standard dimension, is going to fit in like the regular envelopes and stuff like that, so A7 card, I created a template to allow you to do that very quickly in Procreate. Now this template, don't worry, it's totally free. If you want to download it below and follow along with me, it will be linked in the description below. So the template is going to look a little bit like this. Now already when you open it, if we go in the canvas information, you're going to notice we have the same dimension. Well, right now it's in millimeters and pixel, but you're going to have to trust me, it is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, which means you can just print this card, or this template I should say, on your regular printer with regular paper. So if we look a little bit closely here in the corners, you're going to notice we have some little cut marks. A regular standard A7 greeting cards is slightly smaller than just your letter-sized paper, so these cut marks indicate where you would need to cut it later. Now, if we open up the layers, we're going to notice we have a few key layers here that I created again in Photoshop in order to have the right measurements. So the text one is just there to give you some information, but the guide one is the one that is super important. You're going to see on that one you have a few rectangles. So the first one is just white and it has a black outline, and that's your final card. So that's where you're going to cut basically. And outside of that you have a blue line, which is what we call bleed. So really quickly, bleed, what it is, when you're drawing or when you're printing something and you have some color that goes right up to the edge, whether it's a solid color or an illustration or a picture, if you want to avoid having to cut right on that edge and trying to not cut in the white or something like that, you just extend the image a little bit further and then cut in the image. So bleed is that area that you're going to cover as well. So basically here, if you want to have a solid color, make sure that it fills this blue section as well, called the bleed. And if bleed and all these formatting concepts are a little bit overwhelming to you, don't worry, I have a video in which I teach all the key concepts you need to know in order to take a piece of digital art and bring it to print. So I will link that video in the description below if you want a little bit more detail before moving on. Now you also have a couple more layers, the color front and color back layers, which are pretty self-explanatory. Basically, there are layers that have layer mask on them, so whatever color you drop on the layer is going to be a solid color applied to the front and or the back. So you can see you can just drag whatever on there and recolor the front and the back. So that's all good, but now we don't really have an illustration or anything at all for that matter on our letter. So unless you want to actually draw in this file, which you totally could, you can go ahead and locate in your Procreate gallery the artwork you want to use and just go ahead and hide the background and any other element that you might want to hide, like the ground shadow in my case. So once that is done, you can go in the wrench icon menu, and in the add menu, you can pick copy canvas at the bottom. So this is going to copy all the layers, and then you're going to be able to go back to your template, go back in the wrench icon menu, and this time click paste. So you're going to see your illustration is fully pasted. Now it's going to paste it above the last layer you had selected. So in my case, just above the color back. So you can just position it wherever you want it to be. And then using the arrow tool, making sure that it is set to uniform, you can just resize it and position it wherever you want it to be. Now, one thing to absolutely remember here is that it's super important to cover the bleed entirely, But you don't want it to spill out, because if it spills out, then it's encroaching in the margin. So your printer, when it prints, usually you need at least, for most printer, it's 1/4 of an inch around your paper where the printer is just not able to print. So if you have color that goes on that section, your printer is going to have to shrink the entire image so that it fits within its own margin. So in order to avoid that, what you're going to do is you are going to open your layers and you're going to apply your illustration as a clipping mask on the front. So you can just tap on the inserted image and then click clipping mask. And for that to work, you need to make sure that your inserted image, so your illustration or your picture, is right above the layer mask for the color front layer. So just right there. And if you don't want to have a background color on your front, you can just drag white over that layer and it should be all good. Now, I like to match the back with something on the illustration, and so in that case, I'm just going to recolor it with the same color as the Christmas tree real quick, like this. And that means all we have to do now before exporting is hiding the layers that we don't want to print. So hiding the text layer, hiding the guides, but making sure that we keep the cut and fold. Otherwise, we won't have our little guides to cut later, which would be annoying because that's the whole point of the template. So we need these little corners right here. In order to print this, you could export it as a JPEG. I really like to export it as a PDF, such as the wrench icon menu, clicking the share option and then selecting PDF. And obviously going with best so that we can keep the 300 dpi resolution. Here you could go ahead and print it directly if you have your printer connected to your iPad, or you can save it as a file and you can send it to your own computer and print it from there. So whatever works the best for you for printing is what you're going to do now. And one little tip, since we have the right size, make sure that your printer is not set to automatic scaling. Otherwise it might shrink it or make it bigger. You want to keep it 100%. If your printer has some really big margin, you might need to shrink it maybe around 97 or 95%. That's okay, but just try to avoid shrinking as much as possible. Otherwise you're not gonna have the real A7 size. If it's a little bit smaller, it's fine. Now, I'm very sorry because my printer won't turn on anymore, so I had to make a pretend version of this card, but it's the same template. It's just that you would have an illustration where, in my case, I just hand wrote front. So. Anyway, there are a few key tips to remember to properly cut and mostly fold your card so that it looks like a professional card. And for that, you're going to simply need some sort of a backing to cut on, a metal ruler, some sort of a cutting tool, so I have a precision X-Acto knife, and a regular butter knife. One important thing that you might want as well is a thicker piece of paper. So this is just regular printer paper, but you might want to go with something a little bit thicker to make your card, hold well by itself. And if you want, you can check out the description below. I'm going to leave a few recommendations for cardstock that you could use. So for now, we're going to, put the butter knife aside, and we're going to start by cutting using the guides. So this might seem pretty straightforward, but it's quite easy to get wrong actually. So the first tip I have for you is when you use your ruler, try to make your cut, or try to use the ruler to protect the card. So place the ruler on top of the card and make the cut on the side that you would discard anyway. So in my case here, I'm going to put the ruler on top of the left so that this right little section here could be discarded if needed. The other tip is don't cut all the way through, so make sure that your paper still remains attached, otherwise you're going to lose your guides for the other side. So again here, I want to protect the card, so I'm going to put the ruler on the right of my cut and then make the cut on the left, so that way again, if I slip, which I'm about to do in a video right here, if I slip, I'm not cutting the card, I'm just cutting the excess paper, which doesn't matter. Otherwise, you might risk, cutting the card and then you would have to print it again, which is annoying. So you just have to repeat these steps for the top as well. So once more, just protecting the card and then making the cut above. And for the bottom one, protecting the card and making the cut below. And with that, it is time for the secret passwords. I'm going to do it real quick in this video. If you've watched this far, leave me a comment below saying what you have on your greeting cards. So what are you using this video for? Basically, I'm super curious. I want to know what you guys are creating. And the secret password is really cool because it gives me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me to create better tutorials for you guys. But it's also really cool because you guys know me, you see my face in the intro, you have my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you guys are. And whenever you leave a comment, I get to see sometimes your face, sometimes your name, and it's just really cool to see who's part of our creative community here on this channel. So if you've done your cuts nicely, you should be able to take the excess paper off very easily. If not, make sure to go back in your corners and just snap them, because otherwise you might rip the paper. So make sure you really go back and cut the corners well if it hasn't been done the first time. So if you've printed your card on just regular thin paper like I did, it would be very easy to go ahead and manually fold it just like a regular fold. So aligning the corners and then pressing with one finger, you would get your card. But again, this card is going to be very, very flimsy, so I don't necessarily recommend you do that. But if you have cardstock, it's really important that before you fold, you score your paper. If that means nothing to you, that's totally okay. That's when the butter knife comes into play. But basically, we're just going to use the knife to create an indent in the paper, which is later going to become a very nice, clean, neat fold. So you need to turn your card around because we need to create the fold inside the card. So basically open up your card or turn the paper around so that the design is on the mat, and then decide where your fold is going to be. So in my case here, I have a bunch of random lines and then you're going to pick again your ruler. It doesn't need to be metal this time, but you probably still have the metal one around, so use the same one, as well as your butter knife. So now here for the knife, you're not going to use the actual knife part, you're going to use the back edge. And make sure that when you're pressing, your finger is not on the blade. I don't want you guys to get cut, that's not nice. So don't put your finger there, put it on the handle. And then you're just going to press on your paper 2 or 3 times, quite hard, to create some sort of an indent. And there you go, you scored your paper. There are some tools that you can buy, but you really don't need a tool. Just use a butter knife and you're all good. And as you can see now, it folds really, really easily. It's a nice, neat fold. You can go back over with your nail to really secure the fold. I don't know how to say it, but to make it even crisper. But you can see it's super, super nice. If I was to try and do it without the score, it would be, not nearly as straight, first of all, and not nearly as neat. So you can see the scoring makes it super, super clean and sharp, and the fold by hand, there's a lot of wrinkles. It really doesn't look professional at all. And if you enjoyed this tutorial and want to learn more formatting tips for Procreate, I highly recommend you check out this video in which I'm going to teach you exactly that. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.